And while I can appreciate the importance of that, yet also my concern would be how to ensure that this document becomes a living document and that the constituency behind this document have access to it, are informed about it in the first place, have access to it, and can in fact use this document, to bring to account those either multinational corporations or governments or whoever they want to, to bring to account with regards to transgression of these rights and how their rights can be protected.
Question: if you are with or against social protection, and social protection should be in whatever program or alternative or what made by the left, wherever. This is not the question. The question is how to execute this program. I mean, you have commented the uprising in Egypt and Tunisia and said that the people went on the street for dignity. I agree, but with another comment. That was connected to the class, because the demand for dignity was from the middle class, which were also on the street. But the lower classes in the society, which are the majority, the vast majority, they want cash. They don't want even to discuss about democracy. They want cash, and they don't want even to discuss about social protection. This is something for their ears super luxurious. No? It's not on the agenda. No? And this situation still until today. So we cannot say Tunisian or Egyptians, they demand this. No, because Tunisian and Egyptians are different classes and they have their own different demands accordingly. So I would prefer to put the question on another base. It's not about yes or no concerning social protection, but about how to put that, how to implement that. And for this, I would say any kind of program or alternative should be made by the people themselves. They should develop it. It is not a big deal to sit together, here some nice intellectual lefts, and they can write a nice program, and they can write very interesting alternatives, but it is worth nothing if it's not applicable or it's only for us. So the strength of any alternative or whatever scenario, revolutionary or not, is to be carried by the people themselves. And this is a long process. So I can tell you how we implement such an approach in Egypt, just directly. We have a new movement now, started 3 years ago, of the so-called independent unions. In the time of the uprising, January 2011, they were 3 of them. One interesting and 2 other small. Now we have about 600 of them. These 600 are very small and very tiny and unexperienced, and they have nothing. No? So, and they want support. So we support them to achieve what we want, and not right. Thank you.
I was born in Germany. I'm working now in the Brussels office of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, so Northwestern Europe, now being 36 years old. I can speak for my Northwestern European generation. I can tell you there's one point which has a dramatic impact on our ability to even think about a change of reality. This is fear. Maybe it's different in other regions. They deal in another way, or they are used to it. But I can see in my generation and the younger people, they are so completely, they are hampered, they can't move, they can't think because of fear. It's a kind of cultural de-learning of how to move collectively. And we have just to remember the last year, 15th of May, the Indignados movement. There was a big debate in the European left. Are they revolutionary or aren't they? Should we support them or shouldn't we? And of course, they were not directly revolutionary, but they were revolutionary in so far that they developed an idea of working together. And if we could start with this social protection, if we could make this one center of left policy, and unfortunately it's not always, if the left is thinking about it, it's not always in the center, fear would be less strong and people would immediately start thinking about a better future. And for that reason, the social protection is attacked directly by our enemies because they know that they could stop us with this. For that reason, it's very practical. We can start today and we will have a kind of long-term revolutionary impact. Thanks.
It also picks up some of the contradictions that were mentioned this morning. Like you mentioned shortly, the question of natural resources. And I also think that we should always keep in mind that indigenous people are not per se better or different than other people. And I've been working for like more than 20 years with indigenous people all over Latin America. And you have indigenous people against coal mining and indigenous people that are in favor of coal mining. You have indigenous people with good collective decision structures that are an example for everything and with a good relationship to nature, and you have others that don't. So I think we should always be, because especially in Europe there's always a tendency that just the indigenous people that correspond to the image created here about indigenous people are indigenous people and the others are not anymore. Like Evo stopped being an indigenous person for the Europeans when he started building a road. Before that he was indigenous, now the others are just indigenous that are against the road, but he's not indigenous anymore in the perception. So I think we should always keep in mind not to, and it's not against it, it's just, I'm not saying at all that you said that, but I think it's something that we generally should always keep in mind when we're talking about indigenous populations. And the second point is about, I think that the question of the social systems, in maybe linking to the other intervention, the right to live without fear. I think that's basic and it's very important. And I think that the question about reform or revolution is a wrong one. Is a wrong one for several reasons. First of all, it's not that if we're in a worse situation, the revolution comes any nearer. So I think that has been proved 1,000 times that it's not like that. Secondly, if we look, when did we have the strongest struggles in at least the northern world in Europe? When the participation of the working class was the biggest. And they expected more. And I think that's the question. So the contradiction between like capitalism and social rights will start to be there the more social rights are achieved. Because there will be a point that capitalism is not able anymore to satisfy these social rights, even the most progressive form of social democracy or whatever can't do that anymore. And there are some points that show these contradictions. Like, for example, what I mentioned before, the question of recognizing house labor as productive, and so that's something that Venezuela dared to do, can do maybe because there are certain priorities and because it's got oil money, but it's something that would immediately put in serious trouble most of the capitalist countries. So I think it's for an ethnic region, for respect for people, it's totally right to push the question of social rights. On the other hand, it will bring us to make the contradiction between what is possible, what is wanted, what we need and what we have. So between the future, the dream, the idea of whatever socialism and capitalism to make this contradiction stronger.
Is going so deep and so far. I think we should really take it and say, yes, we have to organize a debate that is going far beyond what we can do within this seminar. Because we have a lot of traps and gaps and so on, but concerning the question of social protection. Yeah, but I would like to make a remark to Gabriela and Julie. What I was recognizing is that people who were oppressed, discriminated, socially excluded in Latin America took their right to develop their autonomy, to fight for their cultural identity. And this is something that is really, something that is great and gives an example how to do it. And I think what we are missing in our traditional, let's say, left cultures is a cultural provocation today. When I'm participating in manifestations on social issues in Germany, we have very poor culture that we express ourselves. We are not proud, we are not anti-consumist, we have nothing that is really our cultural expression against our capitalist system. We lost it. It was different in the beginning of the last century and so on. The proletarian movements had their own very autonomous and provocative cultures. We lost it. And I think the indigenous people today, they won their provocative autonomous culture today. And I'm very sure that there are a lot of contradictions in it, and that there is nothing full of harmony and so on. But what I think, I think there are, coming back to these very progressive constitutions in Latin America, I would say there is something in it that really shows how to act, and that's that they are talking about the participation in democratic processes. And I think there are the contradictions that Dario expressed, that there is a necessity for the countries to industrialize. And there's on the other hand, is the resistance of the people who try to keep their environment as it is, and so on. And I think what these constitutions give as a, let's say, as a structure is that they have to be, they should be organized public debates on these conflicts, and that the interest could express themselves and talk, and the groups could talk together. And this should be, and I think there is a problem for the moment with the part of the left governments, that they don't take into their hands this kind of communication and contradictory process of public communication. And I think this is something that could be developed, because you have all written down how to do it, but it's not happening for the moment. And so I think what we can see from outside, there are these contradictory and sometimes very strong contradictory developments. But in a way, I think that what for me as a challenge, as a real challenge, is that we live a lot of social exclusion, discrimination, discrimination and racism against minorities in our industrialized north. And I think what we can take as, let's say, as a kind of example is this kind of autonomy and the courage and the energy to develop a new kind of culture?
I have a methodological problem, an epistemological problem. How do we know what we know? I worked for many years in Zimbabwe and Southern Africa for about 20 years with rural communities. I came from a Marxist background, only to be humbled by the people there, because the people knew more than I knew. The people had 3 levels of communication with the living, the dead, and the unborn. And their means of communicating with the unborn and the dead, spirit mediums. Spirit mediums were the ones that guided the liberation struggle in Zimbabwe. So I began to question myself. All that I learned from Western universities were half-truths. Now I'm sitting here and Mahmoud, who should be Mamdou.
Sí, muchas gracias por hablar mi nombre correctamente.
Made a good point, namely that knowledge comes from struggle. Sometimes we elite, and that of course includes myself too, have an idealistic vision of the future, not a dialectical one. Knowledge comes from struggle. Indigenous people, I got exposed to them only recently, when I went to Latin America, to Ecuador and Peru. I was quite amazed at their level of understanding of the world. I only interacted with some of them through mediation. The word indigenous is not really a dictionary word. It's a much more deep. I understood, for example, that the Incas did not have written language the way we write, but they had the knots that they made out of threads and ropes. They had communication. And by that means they were able to construct an engineering skill in Machu Picchu which was completely beyond my expectations. The reason I think this is because in Africa also, apart from a few countries like Egypt and Ethiopia and so on, we don't have written language. But we have a very rich culture of communication, which we have never tapped. And we elite can come into conference, I'm not saying negatively, I think it's important that we do discuss here. But we can work out idealistic notions of the future. Well, who has known the future? Mamdou has a very good point, namely that formerly there were only 3 trade unions, there are now 600. Why? Because in the course of the struggle it opens up space for those who are not spoken to speak, for those not visible to be visible. I'm not sure we here in this meeting, I'm only raising a methodological point. I'm not sure we are epistemologically know what we know. I'm not sure of that for myself. And I'm thinking that we have not integrated sufficient dialectics. The point that Francois was making this morning. All struggles are dialectic. There is no linear programming. So therefore our visions must be enlightened by some modesty. Thank you.
My colleague here behind the support, I can't see him, he has said to Francine, and his statement was passing by so as if this is something agreed upon, something quite obvious, but I disagree radically on that. He said wordly, the way of demanding social protection will lead one day to the situation that capitalism will not be able to satisfy or fulfill the social protection demands, and then that means it's the end of the story. I don't think so at all. And so that's exactly what has been said, and you have a protocollant on your right side, so you can scroll back and get it out. I think there is a mistake in this. We cannot talk about social protection in general, because we have here global north and global south, and there is far difference between social protection in the global north, in which we are now sitting, and social protection which also exists somehow in the global south. And this difference, and we are talking about social protection as demands for the poor, as you have mentioned, the slum population and so on. So this kind of social protection in the north is the result of what Samir Amin called the imperial rent. The imperialist rent accumulated along about 300 centuries led to this situation, to the situation that people from the global south are not capable to pay a train ticket in the north. No? So let us talk about social protection in particular, not in general.
Social protection. I think that in the radical left here in Europe, but also in the global south, there has been generally some kind of opposition to that kind of idea, because it was associated with a social democrat type of solution. And I think that we have to try to come out of this. And this is not a matter of abstraction. I think it's a matter of very concrete facts. When I see in Latin America what is happening in Brazil, in Nicaragua, in Ecuador, in Bolivia, we can see, of course, that real achievements have been made. When you take millions of people out of extreme poverty in just a few years, that is not nothing. It is really an achievement. But the whole problem, the whole question is how to do that without falling in an assistential program. And that is one of the main questions. If it is an assistential program, it does not change fundamentally the situation. But we cannot say that from an abstract point of view. We have to go in the field and make research on what is really happening. If I take Brazil, I see, for example, that people like Frei Beto, after a few months or a year or something like that, renounced to the program. If I take Nicaragua, Orlando Núñez, who was very involved in the program at the beginning, also withdrew, because of course they found, or they felt, that the program was not answering to the real questions. And so the whole problem is how to make such program work without transforming themselves in just assistential programs. And of course, this is linked with perhaps the concept of transformative, precisely. That means it is not an assistential program if it is linked with fundamental reforms. I had long conversation with the minister in Brazil in charge of those programs, and he told me, no, it is not assistential, because we are linking these programs with some request. The family must send the children to school. They must be part of a health program, etc. There are some conditions. And of course, those conditions are excellent. But that is not enough to keep those programs out of an assistential perspective if it is not linked with a real land reform, for example, or with programs where people can exercise an economic control on the means of production. If it is not linked with programs where people can control the protection of nature, etc. So the problem is to see what is happening in reality. And I don't say that, of course, that it cannot be linked, but I say that for the moment, those concrete programs have a certain type of assistential perspective. And I think also, but we have to study that this is in fact weakening social movements. I see, for example, in Brazil, the problem of the MST, of the landless peasant movement. I have the impression, but I cannot affirm that it is an hypothesis, of course based on quite a few contacts, that the movement may be weakened precisely by those programs. So we have to try to see how to handle that and trying to have good programs of research programs to see what is happening in reality. The second reflection is about poverty. The idea of declaring poverty illegal, I think, is a very good idea, and which goes very far, because that means that poverty is not considered as a status, but as a social relation. Like slavery was declared illegal, and it was declared illegal because it was a social relation. You don't declare illegal a status. You declare illegal a social relation. So, to ask the declaration of legality of poverty means that you see poverty as a social relation. And that is, I think, very important when precisely the World Bank is considering poverty as a status. And all the policies to fight against poverty are based on that kind of conception of poverty. And so adopting the idea of illegality is also adopting the analysis of poverty as a social relation.
Produced by oppressing, exploiting the third world or the South, or by specific parts of the population in your own country. It's something that doesn't reflect the character of oppression and exploitation. And so I think what is really needed for a future debate on social protection is the deconstruction of these meanings and these contents. And I think what is really basic is that what meant François in his remarks, that we have to connect it with the activity and the needs of people. And I think there is a very fundamental need of all human beings to contribute or to realize their life by activities and to contribute to society and so on, which is and I think also in this dimension we have to reflect it. But really, I think we are not able to do it today. And I would really like if we could follow this because it's a very existential question. And by example, what is my concern about the basic income proposals is too the fact that it doesn't reflect the content of redistribution that is not a neutral one. And that it is not it's not a solution to existentialism. And so I think this is also to put into account, because I stop here because I go too far. Thank you.